She didn't just walk into the room. She materialized like a silent, crimson-clad whisper, the kind that steals breath and halts conversation. No one anticipated her arrival, yet every eye in the opulent ballroom became inexorably drawn, trapped in her unflinching orbit. One moment, she was the unassuming assistant, diligently pouring coffee in the hushed confines of a corporate office. The next, she was a force of nature, poised to reconfigure the very foundations of this elite gathering with nothing but a serene smile and the potent, unvarnished truth. They had laughed, they had condescended, they had, with casual disdain, utterly underestimated her. But tonight, the entire dynamic was about to shatter, for beneath those calm, dark eyes and that quietly poised posture lay a secret so formidable, so incendiary, it could ignite a conflagration that would consume their meticulously constructed world. And she was no longer willing to remain silent. The true narrative, the pivotal chapter of Grace Miller's life, was only just beginning. What if the person everyone had so effortlessly dismissed, the one relegated to the periphery, turned out to be the very individual holding all the power, the linchpin of their entire professional ecosystem? Grace Miller had navigated the labyrinthine corridors of Carter and Blake law firm in Manhattan for 3 years, a master of quiet efficiency and practiced invisibility. She was the spectral presence behind the perfectly organized case files, the steaming cups of coffee arriving precisely on cue, the neatly typed agendas that appeared as if by magic, never tardy, never boisterous, and always utterly overlooked. But the dormant energies of her existence were about to awaken. It began with a smirk, a disdainful twist of lips that set the stage for her metamorphosis. "Are you serious, Daniel? You're actually inviting her?" Amanda Blake's voice, sharp as a stiletto, yet cloaked in the deceptive softness of velvet, sliced through the office air. Her perfectly manicured fingers, tipped with a shade of crimson that mirrored a fresh wound, clutched her designer purse as she leaned conspiratorially toward Daniel Carter, the firm's senior partner and her not-so-secret paramour. Grace, positioned just a few feet away, meticulously rearranging a stack of legal folders, felt her ears burn, not with shame, but with a simmering, indomitable resolve. Daniel, immersed in a document, didn't even acknowledge her with a glance. "It's the firm's annual gala, Amanda. Everyone is invited." Amanda rolled her eyes with an audible sigh, a theatrical gesture of utter exasperation. "Everyone important, you mean?" From a nearby opulent desk, Charles Grant, another senior partner with a perpetually self-satisfied smirk, chimed in. "She might not comprehend the intricacies of our discussions at these events, Daniel. It might be a little above her station." A low, patronizing chuckle rippled through the room, a sound designed to diminish, to invalidate. Grace tightened her grip on the folder, the cardboard edges digging into her palm, but her expression remained an unblemished mask of composure. She had perfected the intricate art of stillness, of denying them the visceral satisfaction of a reaction, of watching her crumple. Then Daniel spoke again, his tone chillingly deliberate, almost clinical. "Grace Miller, you are formally invited to the gala this Saturday. I trust you will know how to conduct yourself appropriately." The silence that followed was suffocating, thick with unspoken assumptions and veiled amusement. Grace stepped forward, placing the files on his polished mahogany desk with a gentleness reserved for handling priceless artifacts. "Thank you, Mr. Carter," she said, her voice a flat, measured monotone, utterly devoid of any perceptible emotion. "I'll consider the invitation." Amanda erupted into a peal of derisive laughter. "Consider? What else would you be doing, Grace? Binging reruns with a frozen dinner in your tiny apartment?" Grace turned slowly, deliberately, to face her tormentor. Her dark eyes, usually shadowed and withdrawn, glinted with an unreadable, almost preternatural intensity. "I always have options, Miss Blake. It's simply that some opportunities, no matter how prestigious, are not worth my time." Amanda's carefully constructed composure fractured, her face stiffening, a raw surprise etched into her features. A perceptible shift, a subtle recalibration of power, rippled through the room. Grace gathered her few personal belongings and exited, leaving a palpable vacuum in her wake. But just before she reached the ornate door, she paused. "One question, Mr. Carter," she said, her voice echoing faintly in the suddenly hushed space. "Does this invitation come with any specific agenda?" Daniel hesitated, a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. "Just for everyone to have a good time, Grace." She nodded once, a crisp, decisive movement. "Understood. Have a good afternoon." The click of the door as it shut behind her resonated through the office, a sound far louder than any shout, leaving behind a silence that spoke volumes. That night, in the comforting, albeit cramped confines of her tiny Brooklyn apartment, Grace collapsed onto the worn couch, the day's indignities weighing heavily upon her. Her younger sister, Lily, a vibrant whirlwind of youthful energy, sat cross-legged at the dining table, engrossed in scribbling notes for her college class. "You look like you've just returned from a war zone," Lily observed, her gaze still fixed on her textbook. "I might as well have," Grace muttered, kicking off her heels with a sigh of weary relief. "I got invited to the firm's gala." Lily finally looked up, her eyebrow arched in a question. "And that's bad? How?" Grace closed her eyes, the phantom echo of Amanda's mocking laughter, and Daniel's clipped, dismissive voice still fresh, a raw wound in her memory. "Because they didn't invite me to include me, Lily. They invited me to humiliate me, to put me in my place." Lily set her pen down with a decisive click and moved to sit beside her sister, her presence a warm, anchoring weight. "So don't let them." Her voice was firm, unwavering. "Go." Grace opened her eyes, meeting her sister's earnest gaze. "I don't belong there, Lily. I wasn't born into that world of privilege and power." "But you've worked your way into it," Lily countered, her voice gaining a compelling fervor. 3 years at that firm, Grace. You know their playbook. You know how they move, how they talk, how they manipulate." Grace shook her head, a sigh escaping her lips. "They're sharks, Lily, and I'm just—" "And you're smarter than all of them," Lily interrupted, her words a crisp, undeniable truth. "And you've got something they'll never possess. True class. The kind you don't need a storied last name or a bloated bank account to acquire." A lump formed in Grace's throat, a sudden wellspring of emotion. "What if I go, and I just prove them right?" Lily took her sister's hand, her grip warm and reassuring, and looked her dead in the eye, her youthful gaze imbued with an ancient wisdom. "Then you proved them wrong, Grace. With your head held high, with every fiber of your being, you've been surviving in the shadows for far too long. Maybe it's time they finally saw your light." Grace offered no immediate answer. Instead, she stared out the window at the shimmering, indifferent skyline of New York City, a million lights twinkling like distant, unattainable stars. Somewhere out there, in a penthouse apartment high above the city, Amanda and Daniel were undoubtedly sipping expensive cocktails, their laughter echoing with the cruel joke they believed they had made of her. Perhaps, Grace mused, it was finally time for the joke to stop being funny. Saturday night descended upon the city like a storm waiting to burst, charged with an unforeseen energy. The Grand Lexington Hotel, an architectural marvel of polished marble and gleaming brass, sparkled under the glow of cascading chandeliers. Champagne flutes clinked with a delicate, ethereal sound, and the ballroom pulsed with the elegant chatter and carefully curated laughter of New York's elite. Daniel stood near the grand entrance, adjusting his tie with a nervous, almost frantic repetition. Amanda, resplendent in a shimmering gold gown that shimmered with a value far exceeding Grace's annual rent.
"Relax, Daniel. She's not coming. People like her don't show up to places like this."
Charles Grant joined them, flanked by two other senior partners, a collective aura of smugness emanating from their huddle.
"If she does show up,
Charles drawled, a smirk playing on his lips.
I hope she remembered to wear her office blazer."
But before Daniel could even formulate a retort, the room, as if by some invisible command, fell into an eerie, prescient hush. All heads, as one, swiveled toward the threshold. Grace stood there. She wore a crimson dress, a shade so deep it seemed to absorb the light around her, yet it glowed with an inner radiance. It was simple, classic, perfectly tailored, its lines flowing with an almost sculptural grace. Her dark hair cascaded in soft, effortless waves, framing a face devoid of elaborate makeup. No flashy jewelry adorned her. No ostentatious adornments competed for attention. Just presence, an unassailable, commanding presence that resonated through the room. Her eyes, no longer veiled, swept across the gathered luminaries, with the ease of royalty surveying their domain. Not with arrogance, but with an absolute, undeniable certainty. She began to walk forward, slow, poised, each deliberate step a silent yet powerful challenge to every preconceived notion they harbored about her. Someone whispered behind Daniel, a hushed, incredulous murmur, "Who is that woman?" Amanda's perfectly manicured nails dug into his arm, her carefully constructed composure threatening to shatter. "That's not possible," she hissed, her voice barely a breath. When Grace finally reached them, she offered a polite, almost imperceptible nod. "Good evening, Mr. Carter. Thank you for the invitation." Daniel struggled to find his voice, a strangled sound catching in his throat. You look different." Grace offered a genuine smile then, and it was as if someone had suddenly illuminated every corner of the vast ballroom, filling it with a soft, captivating light. "It's just a dress, Mr. Carter. Nothing more." The very temperature in the room seemed to shift, subtly, irrevocably. Respect, awe, and perhaps a primal, dawning fear. The night for Grace Miller was only just getting started. Grace didn't merely walk through the ballroom, she glided, an almost ethereal movement that seemed to defy gravity. Every single pair of eyes in that sprawling space tracked her, mesmerized, as if time itself had yielded to her passage. Conversations paused mid-sentence, words hanging in the air, unfinished. Crystal glasses, raised in mid-toast, froze halfway to expectant lips. She wasn't just an unexpected guest, she was an undeniable revelation. The dismissed assistant had, in one breathtaking entrance, rewritten the unspoken rules of the room, forever altering its very atmosphere. Daniel Carter stood near the dining area, rooted to the spot, his whiskey glass trembling almost imperceptibly in his hand. For 3 years, Grace had existed in the periphery of his vision, a constant fixture, always there, yet never truly seen. But tonight she was not the woman who prepared briefing binders with silent diligence. She was not the woman who fetched his coffee with practiced efficiency. She was something else entirely, something infinitely more. Amanda Blake, ever the social chameleon, recovered first, her fake smile snapping back into place like an impenetrable shield.
Interesting choice of dress.
She said, her voice bright, saccharine, yet laced with an undeniable corrosive venom.
Very bold. Did you buy it just for tonight, Grace?
Grace turned to her, her smile still gentle, utterly unbothered, her composure an unyielding fortress.
Actually, I've had it for years. Sometimes elegance simply waits for the right moment to reveal itself.
Amanda's jaw tightened, a muscle twitching almost imperceptibly. The insult was subtle, yet its precision was surgical, cutting through the carefully constructed facade. The surrounding crowd, sensing the delicious tang of potential conflict, began to whisper, their murmurs a rising tide of anticipation. Romero Grant, another senior partner, a man of unctuous charm, stepped forward with a patronizing grin.
Well, what a surprise to see you, Grace. You've certainly made quite an impression.
"Surprises make life interesting, don't they?" she replied, her voice soft but resonating with an inner steel.
And impressions? Well, those depend entirely on the eyes of the beholder.
Daniel, sensing the escalating tension, tried to intervene.
Why don't we all head to dinner?
But his voice, usually so authoritative, lacked its customary weight, failing to cut through the electrified air. The master of ceremonies, oblivious to the subtle power play, announced the opening of the main course. But no one moved. Not until Grace, with an effortless grace, began to walk towards the dining area herself. Her posture was impeccable, shoulders square, chin raised, not like someone desperately trying to fit in, but like someone who had simply stopped asking for permission altogether. During dinner, Amanda had subtly, expertly maneuvered herself to sit beside Grace, her fork hovering midair over her salmon, a silver dagger poised for a rhetorical strike.
It must be quite the experience for you.
Amanda purred, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness.
being around such sophisticated people considering your background.
Grace slowly, deliberately placed her knife down on the pristine tablecloth.
Are you referring to the experience of working with wealthy individuals after growing up in a working-class neighborhood?
Amanda blinked, momentarily caught off guard.
Well, I wouldn't put it quite so crudely.
Grace finished her sentence, tilting her head slightly, her gaze unwavering. Poverty isn't shameful, Amanda, and wealth, as you can clearly see, does not guarantee taste. A collective gasp, soft yet distinct, rippled down the length of the long table. Someone, startled, dropped a fork, its clatter echoing in the sudden, profound silence. Even Charles Grant coughed into his napkin, clearly struggling to suppress a laugh that threatened to escape. Before Amanda could formulate a response, a man approached their table, his tailored blazer and prominent press badge immediately revealing his identity. "Excuse the interruption," he said, his voice brisk and professional. "I'm Brian Collins from Global Times. Miss Grace Miller?" Grace turned toward him, a flicker of genuine puzzlement in her eyes. "Yes? I believe you coordinated the digital literacy program in New Orleans 3 years ago," he stated, his gaze direct and admiring. "I've been trying to track you down for a significant piece on effective community leadership. May I?" Amanda looked utterly dumbfounded, as if she had been slapped with her own designer clutch. "You must be mistaken," she interjected quickly, her voice tight with a desperate edge. "She's just an assistant." Brian didn't even glance at her, his focus unwavering on Grace. "She's the reason over 1,000 adults in Louisiana now competently use computers, manage their own burgeoning businesses, and help their children with schoolwork. That, Miss Blake, makes her someone I am most certainly interested in interviewing." Grace offered him a graceful, almost imperceptible nod. "We can speak here, if the others don't mind." Amanda's fingers whitened around her wine glass, her knuckles stark against her tan skin. The veins on her neck began to pulse visibly. Brian clicked his recorder on. "How did you manage to involve so many families from such diverse backgrounds?" Grace leaned back in her chair, her voice calm, clear, and imbued with an undeniable passion. "By understanding a fundamental truth, that education isn't a privilege, it's a return of dignity. Many of the people we helped weren't lacking intelligence, they lacked access. Some were highly accomplished doctors or teachers in their home countries, but the complexities of migration had for a time stripped them of that identity. We helped give it back." Even Amanda, for once, was silent, utterly bereft of a retort. Brian scribbled notes rapidly. "And the sessions were multilingual, correct?" "Yes," Grace confirmed. "English, Spanish, Vietnamese, and Creole. My grandmother always said every language you learn gives you a new soul." Romero cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with the direction the conversation had taken. His usual bravado diminished. "Grace, do you speak all those languages?" "I speak enough," she answered simply, with a serene smile. "But for the deeper work, I collaborated with native speakers, ensuring true understanding." Then Brian turned to Daniel, his expression expectant. "Mr. Carter, having someone with this kind of background, this kind of vision, must be a truly invaluable asset to your firm." Daniel cleared his throat, the sound unusually dry. He hesitated, visibly struggling to articulate a response that matched the sudden, towering presence of Grace. We're evaluating opportunities," he finally managed, his words sounding hollow, inadequate. Grace said nothing. She didn't need to. The long, uncomfortable pause that followed spoke volumes, articulating every unspoken truth in inadequacy. For the next 10 minutes, the entire room, an assembly of New York's legal elite, watched her, listened to her, as if she were the undisputed keynote speaker of the entire night. And when Brian, utterly captivated, asked to take her photo, she agreed, posing with a quiet, inherent poise that transcended any need for artifice. After the impromptu interview, Grace returned to her chair as if nothing extraordinary had occurred. She calmly picked up her drink, glanced around the table, and said, her voice utterly devoid of triumphalism, "So, where were we?" Amanda said nothing, her face a mask of furious, mortified crimson. Romero suddenly became fascinated with his dessert, his gaze meticulously fixed on a single crumb. And Daniel? Daniel stared at her with a kind of stunned, awe-struck wonder, as though he had just discovered that the sky he had always assumed was a mundane gray was in fact a vibrant, burning red, a canvas of unimagined color. But deep inside Grace, something profound had shifted. Something had utterly unlocked. For the first time in years, she wasn't contorting herself, bending her true nature to make others comfortable in their mediocrity. She wasn't hiding her light, dimming her own brilliance to fit into someone else's narrow shadow. The room, with its judgmental gazes and condescending whispers, no longer controlled her. She had become, irrevocably, its true center of gravity. She had shown them not what they expected, an obedient, grateful assistant, but what they most vehemently feared, a woman who knew exactly who she was, a woman of formidable intellect and unyielding integrity. As the night progressed and the forced, awkward laughter returned, Grace stood once more. She walked, with purpose, towards the grand balcony, needing the cool, clean air. As she stepped outside into the crisp New York wind, she finally allowed herself a small, secret smile. Behind her, Daniel followed, his footsteps hesitant. But she didn't turn. She didn't need to. The real question now wasn't whether he would follow, but whether he would keep walking toward her or retreat back into the comfortable, confining safety of the world he used to know. A world where she was merely a silent shadow. Daniel stepped out onto the balcony, the vast, shimmering expanse of the city, stretching out below them in glimmering silence. Grace didn't turn around. Her eyes remained fixed on the breathtaking skyline, her breath steady and even in the cool night air. For a few moments, the only sound between them was the faint, distant hum of traffic and the muted echo of forced laughter from the ballroom behind them. "You never told me," Daniel finally said, his voice a low, almost reluctant murmur, "about the work you did in New Orleans." Grace offered a faint smile, her gaze still fixed on the city lights. "You never asked." He moved to stand beside her, slowly, tentatively, his hands tucked into his pockets. He was no longer the confident senior partner who commanded boardrooms with an effortless authority. He looked like a man unraveling, not from failure or defeat, but from a profound, dawning recognition of a truth he had long ignored. "I didn't see you," he admitted, the words a raw confession. "Not really. Not for 3 years." "I know," she replied calmly, her voice devoid of bitterness, only a quiet certainty. "That's why it was so easy for you to talk about me as if I wasn't even in the room. You didn't think I had anything worthwhile to say." Daniel winced, the admission a palpable blow. "I was wrong, Grace. Terribly wrong." Grace turned to face him now, her expression unreadable but not cruel. "I wasn't waiting for you to see me, Daniel. I was building myself up, quietly, deliberately, so that one day when you finally did look, you'd realize I was already far beyond your reach, beyond any limiting assumptions you held." He exhaled slowly, a long, drawn-out sigh, then nodded, a gesture of profound acceptance. "I deserve that." "No," she said, her voice soft but firm. "You deserve the truth, and so do I." Back inside, the gala buzzed with a newfound, electrified energy. Word of Grace's interview had spread like wildfire. Amanda was nowhere to be seen, having discreetly excused herself after the third person, utterly oblivious, complimented Grace's compelling insights. Romero had retreated to a quiet, secluded corner, his usual bluster deflated. Only the photographer seemed genuinely delighted, already uploading photos of the assistant who stunned New York's elite to social media, the images quickly going viral. Grace returned to her table only briefly to collect her purse. As she walked towards the grand exit, Daniel followed again, his presence a quiet shadow. But she didn't stop this time. Not until they were in the hushed elegance of the hotel lobby, where the night air struck with a cooler, more palpable silence, thick with unspoken truths and unresolved emotions. "What happens now?" Daniel asked, his voice softer, more vulnerable than she had ever heard it. Grace looked at him, her dark eyes sharp and clear, reflecting the distant city lights. "That depends, Daniel. Are you asking what happens at the firm or what happens with us?" He met her gaze, his own eyes earnest. "Both." She offered a faint, almost imperceptible half-smile. "Then let's start with the firm. You want to change things? Start by changing who gets to lead." "You?" he asked, a hint of surprise in his tone. "No," she said, her voice firm. "Not just me, people like me." People who weren't born into this rigid system, but earned every inch of their progress, every single step. People who understand that true power doesn't have to mean stepping on others, but rather elevating them. Daniel was quiet for a long moment, contemplating her words, their profound truth resonating within him. Then he nodded, a decisive gesture. And with us? Grace studied him for a long, searching second, a lifetime of unspoken dynamics passing between them. That's harder, Daniel, because what we never dared to articulate aloud, only worked when I stayed small, when I was someone you could effortlessly protect or more conveniently ignore. And now you're not, he said, the realization settling heavily upon him. No, she replied, her gaze steady, unwavering. Now I'm someone you have to meet eye to eye, as an equal. He didn't attempt to defend himself. He didn't reach for her hand or make any desperate gesture. Instead, with a quiet, profound gesture of respect, he stepped aside and opened the massive hotel door for her. A small gesture, perhaps, but one that resonated with immense significance. The very next morning, social media was ablaze. Photos of Grace, radiant in crimson, went viral, spreading across the digital landscape with astonishing speed. Her insightful quote about elegance not being bought with money was reposted thousands of times, becoming an instant mantra. Hashtags like #GraceMillerRising and #Not Just an Assistant trended for hours, a testament to her undeniable impact. But Grace didn't check any of it. She was already where she needed to be, at the community center in the vibrant East River district, helping set up laptops for a new digital skills class, her focus entirely on empowering others. Lily arrived with coffee and updates from the internet, a breathless recounting of Grace's sudden fame. But Grace just smiled and shook her head, a quiet contentment settling upon her. Let the world say what it wants, Lily. I have work to do. 3 days later, she received an official invitation, not to another glittering gala, but to return to the law firm in a new capacity, as Director of Community Partnerships, a groundbreaking position created by a unanimous board vote. Along with it came a public apology, eloquently written and formally signed by Daniel, prominently posted on the firm's website. She read it once, then placed it gently aside, her gaze already fixed on the future. That night, Daniel showed up at the community center unannounced, his sleeves rolled up, carrying a heavy box of printer ink and office supplies. You're late, she teased, a playful light in her eyes. I had to stop pretending to be important, he replied, a genuine smile gracing his lips. Grace handed him a box of donated books. Then you'd better start learning, Mr. Carter. Months passed, and the firm's very reputation began to shift, to soften, to expand. Grace led innovative outreach programs, bringing in vital voices from underserved communities, using the very system that had once ignored her to elevate others, to give them a platform. Daniel stood beside her now, not in front of her, not behind her, but truly beside her, a silent, supportive ally. One afternoon during a workshop for eager high school seniors, a student raised her hand, her eyes wide with admiration. Miss Grace, she said, her voice filled with awe. How did you get here, from being just an assistant to all of this, to someone so influential? Grace paused, looking out at the hopeful faces before her, then answered simply, her voice resonating with hard-won wisdom. By realizing I never was just anything, and by never, ever letting someone else's limited perceptions define my true value. That night, Grace and Daniel walked home together beneath a city sky that now felt vast and wide open, a canvas of infinite possibilities. There were no grand declarations, no sweeping gestures of romance, no desperate need for such theatrics. What they had built, painstakingly, undeniably, was something far more enduring: mutual respect. And Grace, with every step forward, had learned that respect. True, authentic respect was where everything truly begins.